just when you think you're finished making videos, a doctor's appointment comes along and you're back to COVID zone. No problem. We know how to do this. As you know, we talked in class Friday about topics and sources. However, we're out today on Monday because of Labor Day. We're also going to be out on Wednesday because of a doctor's appointment. Sorry about that bad timing, but I did want to put together this video for you so that you'll have something to go on Friday, when we come back this coming Friday, I'm going to do basically a demonstration. I'm going to show you how to find your sources and evaluate them. And I've actually forgotten the topic that we picked in class, so I'm going to go with like Grand Valley parking or something for these examples today. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of info that you might need or find useful when you're putting together your own work. And again, that's not due Friday, but if you like to start early and get a little head start, I want you to be able to do that. So let's talk about topics and sources. Again, we've covered much of the first half, at least in class. So when you're choosing a topic, what I have here for you is just note the course pack says it needs to be about 2020. That was from a previous version of this when we were talking about the pandemic specifically. Now, you can use any issue that you see as impacting our nation, state, campus, world in any way you want, as long as it meets our basic requirements. And we'll talk about those. So, the big two things to talk about, one is choosing your topic, and the other is finding and evaluating sources. When you think about your topic, think about things that you care about, that you're interested in, that you already know about. Again, it just needs to be a problem that's facing the world, country, state, university, community, whatever that might be. Now, when you're coming up with a topic, maybe it's easy for you. Maybe you know what you want to talk about, or at least you have a general idea. Great. If you don't, try structured brainstorming. Go through with a piece of paper and a timer, write down everything that comes to mind. Review that list, see if anything stands out or you notice any connections that were very common. Then do it again with those selected topics. Try to branch out as far as you can. Find the topic that you like, repeat that step, and that will often give you subpoints and divisions. If you remember from class, we talked about how this could work a number of different ways. If I wanted to talk about, GVSU and money, and it being, it costs too much money to go to school at Grand Valley, maybe I could branch off of that parking and say, look, part of the cost to go to school here is the parking fee, and we need better parking for our students because they're paying for it and they're not getting what they're paying for. All right, the big checklist that you'll need to keep in mind for your topic, I'm not going to check these individually until it's time for your outlines, but please make sure that one, they're appropriate, they're not going to be embarrassing to yourself or others too terribly, that they are controversial. Again, there's at least two or more clearly defined sides that you could take on this, that the topic is timely, so it has to be about the current or future state, not the past. And again, just want to be clear, controversial could be Roe v. Wade. Controversial could be Mac v. PC, right? So you have options. Next, make sure your topic is relevant to the audience. It will impact them in some way, or they'll care about it for some rather obvious reason. And then last but not least, make sure that you're passionate about your topic, or at least come across that way. Because if you don't care about your topic, neither will we. Now, we know a little bit about topics and finding those, figuring that out. But once we do that, the next step starts, and that's finding and evaluating sources. Now, we'll talk about specifics in a moment, but the first thing we talked about in class here is this: the use of primary sources when possible. Primary sources are the original work. So that's from an actual study, an article, a testimony from someone. A secondary source is a report on those findings. So it's not the original, but it's like a news report on a big scientific breakthrough, or a literature review of a lot of different existing pieces of work out there, none of which the literature review author created, but they found those primary sources, put them together in the lit review. The lit review then becomes the secondary source. And I've got down here on the bottom the idea of chasing the thread. And what I mean by that is just it's real easy to do in most cases now with the internet and hyperlinks. So we'll come back to that in just a moment when we look at news sources, and I'll show you how to do that. For your speech, your first one anyway, I do want you to remember that you need one academic peer-reviewed source, and then 2, quality or reliable sources. And you see examples. Now, for the second speech, you'll need 2 or more academic peer-reviewed sources, but for now, it's just the one. So let's talk about those for just a minute. We got to this in class, but I pulled it out because I think it's important to note that the academic peer review process is very in depth, and it guarantees, or at least greatly increases, your chances of getting good, reliable information. We talked about what happens to academics who violate this. One example is Andrew Wakefield here, who is no longer able to publish. Doesn't know his PhD was revoked, his medical degree was revoked because he published an article he knew was false. So when we think about finding these websites or finding these articles, we can go to the website. We did this in class briefly, but I want to jump over real quick just so we're all on the same page. If you go to gvsu.edu/library, you will come across the library website. Here you can search a number of different ways. Hang with me on this. Don't just start typing stuff. Go here to databases, and then the very first one that pops up is Academic Search Ultimate. And this just happens to be my very favorite search engine. I know it's first right there, but it really is great. So go ahead, log in. You may need to put in your info. Make sure you enter it correct. That's always helpful. Coming soon to a computer screen near you. The push. Unlock the door. Great. So here we are. We looked at this. Let's see. Let's redo college and universities. Let's do that one. Let's do parking. All right, we have 24,817 hits from that one. Now, I want you to pay close attention to this. This will be vital for you. When you're looking for peer-reviewed sources and you go to database, remember, and you're coming here to academic search, go down and click on academic journals, and that will limit that. You see, it's still 12,000, but it cut it in half. And then if we add in peer-reviewed, we add in references available and full text. Oops. Let's see. We are now down to only 1,350. But this will help narrow things down. Now, for example, let's say we look at this and it looks like something we like. The Insider View, tackling disabling practices in higher education institutions. If we decide we like this, I would just point out that the source for this that you want to cite, Higher Education, is a journal. So this is the journal name, and all you will need is a 2020 date. So according to a 2020 article from the Journal of Higher Education, and then you would cite it for us. Now, as I also mentioned in class, as you go through these articles, don't take the time to read every one, but if they look interesting, click the folder button, and it will put it in your folder for you, so that when you get to the end, instead of trying to keep up with everything, you can just go right here to your folder and everything will be listed. You can go to the folder view and it's all there. All right, so those are your peer-reviewed journal articles. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what those are and why they're so useful. Now, let's look at news sources for just a moment. News sources are not all created equal. Boy, they can be tough to evaluate. Now, what I'm saying over here when I say household names, those can be very good because people usually trust them. So CNN, New York Times, PBS, NPR, CBS, ABC, NBC, you see it there. That can help your credibility. Although it's not always best to go for the big name. Maybe those lesser known sources are better. So for example, obscure names and specializations like Chickpea Magazine you see over here. I mean, that's very specific, right? Very niche. A gourmet magazine devoted to veganism and whole foods cooking is a pretty great idea, and these guys execute it really well. So I mean, that's very unique. So if we needed something that's about that, we could look at the About Us section and find what we need. Here it is, right? So we could use some of this information. If we needed to cite this source, it would sound weird if we just said according to chickpea.com. But if you said according to chickpea.com, which is an indie vegan lifestyle guide for the anti-consumerist, uh, then you could keep going with that, right? That's all you would need to say. So don't shy away from some of these kind of sources that are really good and unique, um, even though you've maybe never heard of them before. Now, starting with Google News is a great starting point. As I mentioned, if you can get a date and author, that's always nice. There are exceptions to that, especially with AP and Reuters. They won't always use an author. They're what's called a wire service. It's a little different. Local news can be very good. Even the Lanthorn can be great, especially if it is an on campus story. Do beware of satire. It is real. Things like The Onion, for example, that we're familiar with. There's a Tennessee House of Representatives member who gave this very impassioned speech on an Onion article, and he thought it was real. So, these things do fool people, and I just don't want you to be one of those folks. If you are concerned, Google satire news Wikipedia, and there's a full list there that you can see. Now, do beware of things like fake news. I mean, it's hard to trust anything right now because people are calling news fake. You've got people saying, unnamed sources reported this or someone close to that person said this. You've got the former president, the last guy, saying that the liberal media is the enemy of the people. I mean, my goodness. Bias does matter in news. It exists and it matters, but it's also okay on some level. So let's talk about that for a minute. First thing is, I want you to look at this media bias chart. Now, the way that you're going to read this, and we'll cover this in class briefly on Friday, is things toward the center here. See this green line, green line. Anything in this center lane, they're telling us is not extremely biased left or right. Okay. What they're also telling us is if we look at it up and down, that the things at the top are more fact and detailed reporting, whereas the stuff toward the bottom becomes opinion, selective or unfair versions of the truth, propaganda, and then just fake, right? So you can see some things up here. Basically, these are the sources that are best to use in terms of general credibility. Again, New York Times, Washington Post, Time Magazine, Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor, The Hill, PBS, CBS, Reuters, Bloomberg, AP, NBC News, NPR, Politico, Axios, right? So you've got options. Now, the ones in this yellow box, they're still useful. They're still useful. Even that includes MSNBC, CNN, this is both sides here, but you'll want to be careful with these. You'll want to realize that when you're reading these, they are leaning one way or another, but they can still be based in truth and useful. When you get down below the orange line, you're in a danger zone here. I've seen some really great things from the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, even the Federalist from time to time. But those get a little more way out on the edges in terms of trying to get you to go left or right. And then down in the red box here, stay away from these. These are rough. So again, anything center top is ideal for a source. Now, the other thing that I want to show you just briefly, let me hop over here. If you go to a website called MediaBiasFactCheck.com, what you'll find here is a way for you to come up with a news source. Like, let's say you found something out there and you decided you wanted to see if it was biased or not. Let's go with that chickpea. I don't even know if they'll have it here, but we'll try it. Random articles. Nope, nothing matches. Okay. Let's just put in something we all know here. So let's do CNN. Again, this is just where you would enter your search. So this is CNN left bias. Again, sources are moderately to strongly biased toward liberal causes. Now, what if we put Fox News? Fox News. Questionable source exhibits one or more of the following: extreme bias, consistent promotion of propaganda, conspiracy, poor or no sourcing. Right. So they've downgraded Fox News to fake news, basically. But they do it to the right or the left as well. I mean, you saw there, if they were a champion of the left, CNN would have been much higher. All right. Back over for just a moment here. The big thing that you'll want to check for this, for news sources, is that there is a date available and that there is normally a specific author. That's a good sign. If you veer over toward blog territory, be careful only to cite experts. Blogs are not good sources in general, unless, it's a blog where um, Steve Jobs went on and talked about his projects at Apple on a blog, then yeah, use Steve Jobs, but don't cite the blog. Does that make sense? I hope. Um, what I've got on here is that to be an expert, you really need to be one of three things or more. One is a terminal degree, so doctor, nurse practitioner, PhD, MD, JD, or a board certification like an electrician, cosmetic surgeon, those sorts of things, or 20 plus years of experience. So make sure when we say, well, experts say, that they really are experts. Last thing I'll say about that, I'm an expert in one thing, and that's communication. If you were giving a speech on this parking, and according to Dr. Carl Brown, a professor at Grand Valley, who cares? That's just my opinion. It's not an expert opinion. It's no more or less valuable than yours. All right, next up. Statistics are great sources of information because they just summarize things into nice, neat numbers. You see this all the time, 60% chance of rain, These are usually very effective with audiences. So try to find these. They're everywhere out there. I mean, they're in all the news sources you could think of, all the journals you can think of. But try to use these if it's something that might be helpful for you. Also, if you go to Pew Research or Gallup Poll, Google those things. Those are websites, news sources that primarily just use statistics. Last thing I'll say on here, always cite the primary source because newspapers don't typically do studies. That's so true. I'll hear a lot of times people say things like, well, what about the New York Times did a study on... No, they probably reported on it. Let me show you what I mean by that real quick here. Let's go here. Let's just do university parking costs. Then we'll click on news. Whoops. UT should reduce campus parking costs for student employees. So we've got some different ideas here. The Daily Texan. So this is the paper at the University of Texas at Austin. This is great because we can talk about how another school is going to do it. Now, notice that we might say things like on-campus parking permits are expensive as they go for hundreds of dollars and are an extra financial burden for students. Now, I could say, according to Anna Sue, columnist for the Daily Texan earlier this year, said that parking passes are hundreds of dollars. But maybe if we click here, let's click on this expensive link, and now we get the actual price. This is, notice here, folks, this is the primary source. Straight from the University of Texas. Here it is, how much it's going to cost to park and where you're going to park. $784. Wait, was that faculty? No, okay. That is the primary source. Use this. So then you would say, according to Parking and Transportation Services at the University of Texas at Austin, last updated, wait for it, 2022, that's how you would use this website in our class. Right? So that's how we would see the difference between primary, secondary, and these are great statistics because it's money and it's a great primary source. So that was a big win for us. Good. Coming back for just a moment to the PowerPoint, numbers can lie. Just be aware of that. If you are thinking about things like, for example, who paid for something. If it's a Tesla study and it says that Tesla is the greatest car ever, well, we might think that might be a little bit, in favor of uh, one or the other. You got motive for funding the study. So if GVSU funded the study and they were trying to save money and not build a parking garage, they might say, well, we paid some money to do the study and it said it wouldn't matter. So we looked. But could we trust that? I don't know. We need to also think about what variables are being compared. So, in other words, are we thinking about, are we comparing apples to apples? And so, if you have a stat that says, well, parking in the University of California, UCLA, is $1,000 a year, but parking at the community college in Muskegon is free. Why can't we all be free? Well, because it's not comparable parking availability in Muskegon versus Los Angeles. The third thing on there, what date ranges were used. Make sure that you're checking that out. Like, let's say that you have a report from, oh boy, what's something that's, I'm gonna go with the Dollar Tree. The Dollar Tree, everything used to be $1. You probably missed those days. Now it's $1.25. But if they said, oh no, we have the lowest prices of any store out there, and they used their previous price of $1, and that was true, but when they used their most recent price of $1.25, it was not true, then those stats are garbage, right? So we got to be thoughtful about how we use these. And then how do we define terms? Let's say we're talking about binge drinking. Is that 3 drinks in a row, 4 drinks, 5 drinks? Is it different for men and women? Is it different on how many nights? I don't know, but we would need those details. So don't just rely on stats, but boy, they can be helpful. Next up, industry sources. These are pretty much what you would think. These can be really good, especially trade magazines. I'm thinking of things like Consumer Reports, Wired for computer folks. Those sorts of publications can be very, very useful. The one, again, I would just point out a little bit of caution on would be the manufacturers' materials and websites, because they often, of course, will want to promote their own product. Now, if you're thinking about academic sources that are not from journals, what I mean by that is not a peer reviewed, but something from a university. So, for example, you might see something from Harvard out there, and a lot of folks want to say, well, according to Harvard, and then they give me the info, and they assume that it's peer reviewed, but it's not, right? So understand that different universities have different specializations. So, for example, if you wanted to study or talk about law or medicine, Harvard or Duke would be the place to go. If you want to talk about horticulture or keeping a golf course green, Virginia Tech or Grand Valley is the place to be. Um, every university is usually one of the 4 that you see listed there. So an R1 is like University of Michigan, Michigan State. R2 shouldn't be a C. R2 is Research 1, Research 2 would be like Wayne State would be an R2. Comprehensive, that's us, focus on teaching and a well-rounded students. And then liberal arts, smaller than us, that's usually going to be, your very small schools, often religious institutions as well. Multiple government agencies out there. These are all the departments, right? Department of Transportation, Department of Defense, Department of, yeah. So go through those. If those fit your topic, there might be great, very useful info out there. Good news with the oral citations. When you say these sources out loud, you do need to cite them orally in your speech, but there's no APA or MLA to confuse you. It's just publication source and date. That's it. So, according to a 2002 New York Times article, or according to a New York Times article from 2002. You can do it early, middle, or at the end of the info. Here you go. Early, according to the Lanthorn article from 21, GVSU is the best school. In the middle, GVSU, according to a Lanthorn article from 21, is the best school. Or at the end, GVSU is the best school on the face of the earth, according to a 2021 Lanthorn article. So again, don't make this harder than it has to be, and I just want to make sure that you've got the tools you need as you get ready to move forward and start your own research process. Let me know if you have questions. Send me an email. I will happily respond as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I'll see you Friday.